Greetings and welcome back to the Casual Wargamer. Unless you've been living under a Warhammer-shaped rock recently, you know that Games Workshop have recently released Age of Sigmar 4th edition, their Warhammer fantasy equivalent. And actually, it came to mind, it might not be a bad idea, as it looks like I might be getting into AOS now, to do sort of like a rough sort of just go through of my experiences with old Warhammer Fantasy going into Age of Sigmar. Something a little bit different. So you join me on a very hot and humid day. I've got my hot chocolate to keep me going. So let's start. And let me know what you think and what your experience have been with Warhammer Fantasy in general throughout the years. My first experience with it came probably 6 months after Rogue Trader was released in October of '87. A friend of mine bought Warhammer Fantasy Battle 3rd edition. And for some reason, I really enjoyed, we both really enjoyed playing Rogue Trader. So I bought a copy as well, although we never actually got to play it. I remember it's this big chunky book with this really random, chaotic cover. The front was like Harry the Hammer, who was the Games Workshop mascot at the time, bashing in the heads of some two-headed goblin. There's a mutant goblin with a long neck over here. There's an elf wizard at the back, or an elf archer, or whatever, and a chaos warrior and an orc, and it was all a bit mad. And I mean, we're talking a chunky monkey book. It was big. Never actually got to play it. I ended up having that, Warhammer Armies, which was the army book at the time, which was a really good thing. You had all the armies in one book, rather than separate codices like we do now. Everything was in one book, which was really cool. And the other thing I had was a book called Ravening Horde. So I've got a feeling that wasn't 3rd edition. That was late 2nd or maybe early 3rd. And it just seems to be a random assortment of general like terrain layouts or optional rules and things like that. But either way, never actually got to play 3rd edition until probably about 12 years ago. Just had to remind myself of the year then. That was a bit strange. Where one of our former clubmates also had his copy of 3rd edition and his original High Elf army. And at the time, I had a Chaos Warriors army, Nurgle themed, which I shall come to shortly. And we played a game of 3rd edition, and my gods, did it suck. Oh, what an atrocious, bloated, overly complicated rule system. And yeah, High Elves won, by the way, just for reference, but they had a dragon, so yeah. But as I say, I never got to play it back in the day. It sat on my shelf and did nothing. It wasn't until end of 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy that I actually got to play it. Our local club had really kicked off in the mid-00s for Warhammer 40k. And there was some interest from a few people in playing Fantasy Battle. And we had 3 or 4 people who were big into it. My friend Joel used to go to tournaments up and down the country with some of his old university mates. Really big into Fantasy Battle. Loved it, he did. And so we all sort of bought into it. He had several armies. My nephew ended up buying vampire counts. Somebody else went Bretonia. We had a guy that played Empire. I think we had everything covered bar one army, which ended up being Beastmen, or Beasts of Chaos, as it was called, I believe. And I went, actually, I quite like the lore behind Beastmen, and I bought, well, I'm not sure what they called them. I think they called like regiments or something like that. It was a big box which gave you your starter army. Struggled to build that because they're horrible thin arms and spears and things. And I bought a metal model for one of the characters I wanted from the army book. and my friend Joel gave me my first game. And I hated it, absolutely loathed it. Part of it come down to the fact that I'm not a fan of the overly complicated system of movement trays and things like that. I like skirmish games like 40k and one-page rules and things like that. I like skirmish games where models can run around and do whatever the heck they want. But forcing people into these, I know it's seen as a tactical thing. You've got to, it's all about placing, but I don't enjoy that in a war game. And I remember the thing in that game that really did it for me was I had a unit of what are they called, gauze or ungauze, 20-man block, 5x4 with spears. And my friend Joe was showing off his Marauder Horseman. He had a Slaneshi-based army. And Marauder Horsemen, what were called light cavalry, and they had the ability to run around on the spot. So they weren't confined to the redeploying of a movement tray, where you either used your entire movement to reform and reface, or it cost you so much movement to wheel. And they could spin on a die and run and spin, And he was trying to show off running past, I'm going towards him, he runs past me, turns around, and then I'm either forced to take a flank charge or I waste my turn turning round. I turn around and he runs back the other way and does it again. And we do this for like a couple of turns. Now, as I've said in previous videos, my intro to the hobby gaming hobby is role-playing games. I came in with Dungeons and Dragons and the like. That's a big part of my gaming experience, even so now. And I'm like, well, why? I've got these guys with spears. Why can't they not just go and it's like and lunge out and stab these horsemen as they ride by? I mean, come on, common sense. And Joel's simple answer was, well, the rules don't allow you to do that. You have to do this. And I'm like, but all you're going to do is make me just waste time and waste a unit turning backwards and forwards, or get flank charged and die. It doesn't make any sense. And things like that just lost me any interest in the game. So after that, I'm not complaining. It was fun to try it, but it just wasn't for me. And I didn't come back to it until probably mid-8th. Somebody at our club had decided they wanted to run a Fantasy Battle League. But one of the things that we used to have a lot with our old club was that people didn't like playing fixed lists because they get bored. It was a case of you pick your army book, you pick your army, but you could decide what you want, how your army was going to be. You could build your list as you wanted, knowing that your opponent was playing Lizardmen or Empire or whatever. And people really wanting me to come in and play. And I said, well, look, I will do it, but it comes under the proviso that I'm going to pick an army that's quite tough, small army count, quite tough, and I'm only buying whatever it is. I can't remember what we were playing. In my head, I want to say 1,000 points, but I think it was slightly more than that. It might have been 1,000 points, 1,200 at best. I can't remember. But I decided I was going to play Warriors of Chaos, Nurgle themed, as I mentioned earlier. And I'd said to people, this is what I'm having. I'm not buying anything else. So please don't go silly when we play games. Just bring, a list that's like compatible. I'm not going to win, so it doesn't matter. I'm just doing this for the funds. Let's see how that went. Good old hot chocolate. And for the most part, it did. I went for blocks of warriors with heavy armor and shield, so 2-up saves. I had a unit of Chaos Knights, who I really annoyed my friend Joel, because I painted the horses as zebras. I thought, if you're going to be chaotic, you're going to ride zebras. He was not impressed by that. and I had like a Chaos Lord and a Sorcerer, and I can't remember what else I had. No, it's going to bug me now. But either way, I had this nice, really small sort of numbers, but really tough. And for the most part, people played nicely, knowing that I only had a fixed thing. But ultimately, I disavowed the entire thing, and it came down to two reasons. One, the Warhammer Fantasy system was balked. It was so much built on power creep and power level. Power level is not the right word. There were mechanics that were just too strong. And if you got hit by it, you got devastated and so on. And the biggest thing for that, for me, was the magic system. I hated the Warhammer Fantasy magic system. Oh. And I remember things like, was it Purple Sun of Xerxes or something like that, which was basically a Law of Death spell that you just dropped on a unit and the unit just went them and died. And the one, and this is the thing that really, really turned me off of Warhammer Fantasy in this particular league, was there was a spell, I think it was Law of Gold, and about half the armies being played had access to this, and they got this spell. And I forget the name of it, but it basically goes, you pick an enemy unit. If a spell goes off, every model in that unit has to make an armor save. If they pass it, they die. So there's me with 2 up saves, just picking up a movement tray and putting it back in the box. Pick up a movement tray, put it back in the box. It's like, this is, I'm going to use nice words, but this is fluffing ridiculous. You know, it's just, the magic system didn't feel fair. You know, and I felt that people were taking advantage, maybe not intentionally, they're just, they're competitive. I'm not. If they have the option to take that spell, they're going to do it. But it kind of made me feel really bad. And it was like a waste of my time playing. And ultimately it came to a head when one of the players, I think it was my last game, my friend Mike, we're all good over this now, it's all cool. But he had this really cool Skaven army, really nicely thought out, really nicely painted. And we played this game, and whether just coincidence or not, he'd built the perfect list to smash mine. And I was just like, whatever. I don't like the system. I don't like the mechanics. I don't like the magic system specifically as well, as I said. And so that was it. I cast my hand aside and basically sold off my models, and everything else is like not touching it. Then the Warhammer world blows up. The end times, it's like, oh, and Games Workshop made some nonsense up about, people, it isn't making the money anymore, people aren't buying models, all this. I'll go into that in another video at some point, because I have my suspicions on why they blew up the old world. And then a short time later, Warhammer Fantasy is back. It's Age of Sigmar. Dum, 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 dum. And they did a really cool thing with the first edition. They did this data slate thing like we've had with Warhammer 40k recently, where all of your armies, all your old world armies, were given rules for Age of Sigmar. Some of them were really silly, and nobody paid any attention to them. I think I think it was Empire or something, one of the characters or something is, if you, once per game, if you twiddled your moustache or you stroked your beard and said something amusing, the unit got a reroll or something like that, and other weird stuff like that. It was a bit of fun. It was a bit silly. It shouldn't have been there. But I know a lot of people got really upset with it. Very silly. But you have these rules for your armies. And they come up with this fantasy idea of the world has exploded. Sigmar has been flown through space. He finds this dragon or something, and the dragon points him out to these various worlds, which I'm never really sure, are they intended to be actual planets in the cosmos? Are they meant to be planes of existence? By calling them realms, I tend to think they're meant to be planes of existence. And suddenly, this is what you've got. You've now got Stormcast Eternals, which are basically AOS Space Marines, let's be honest. And it's big storyline about coming down and smashing chaos before chaos overruns the world or the realms. And slowly they added armies, and then it's like, well, hang on, you've changed the names. So there's no orcs, there's orcs, there's no ogres, it's ogres. Wood elves and the woodland realm are now Sylvaneth, and high elves are Lumineth or something. Dwarves were Fire Slayers, and it's just, again, I'm going to come into this when I do this video about why I think they ended Warhammer Fantasy. I'm going to touch on this. The other thing they did with first edition Age of Sigmar, which I absolutely loved, the one thing I really, really liked of it, is it didn't have a point system. It was awesome. The idea was you brought what you wanted to bring to the table, but if you brought more than your opponent got a sudden death mechanic. They could pick one of like 3 or 4 things, and if they achieved that in the game, then they won regardless. And I love this concept, because nobody wanted to bring too much, but they didn't want to bring too few. So you ended up with quite reasonably balanced armies. And it was nice. You just brought what you wanted. You played what you wanted. My friend Brian still had his old ogre models from Fantasy, and he played a game where he just had, using the little data slate thing, had or nothing but the characters from the Ogre Kingdom's army. No infantry, no monsters, just characters. I had Tomb Kings at the time, which I had been given by a friend of mine when he decided to drop and not bother with AOS. And, so I got smashed by him. My friend Mike, we had a game. He had this huge Stormcast Eternals army. It was probably about 5,000 points. I had about the same in this Tomb Kings army, and we had a great night one night where we just went, we'll bring everything. We didn't even bother with the sudden death mechanic. We just had this massive game on a 6x4 table where we just went in and smashed the snot out of one another, and it what sucks. But Age of Sigmar got a small problem. The community went, we don't want it without points. We want points. And there were some suggestions that came up. We ourselves copied one of them, which was to say wounds. So you could still take whatever you wanted, but you played a 100 wound army or a 50 wound army or whatever. The problem with that was that some units were slightly overbalanced by that, overpowered. One of them, if I remember correctly, was Lord Croak for Lizardmen, because he had an infinite number of wounds. You could never kill him, which made no sense to me. But how do you balance that? How many wounds do you say he's got? And the moment everybody started clamoring for points, I started to lose interest, because I liked just going, well, I want to play these and put them. The other thing that started to turn me off was I got fed up with the whole Mortal Realms malarkey. AOS, throughout its entire run, doesn't feel like fantasy to me. I am a kind of Tolkien fan. I like generic fantasy. I like a human kingdoms of men. I like wood elves, dwarves, orcs, lizard men. I like the basics. And when you start doing weird stuff like they did with Age of Sigmar, my interest started to dwindle. And the whole game, the concept of the setting and the look of it, the models, what I describe, and lots of people agree with me every time I say this, Age of Sigmar, to me, has the vibe of 1960s, 1970s prog rock album covers. Go look up Hawkwind album covers or something like that, and you'll see exactly what I mean. It's this weird, very unusual fantasy sort of feel. And it got to a point it started to jive on me a little bit, and I didn't like it. So I ditched Age of Sigmar entirely. Now, I've got friends that really like it and they play it, and over the last, 10 years since Age of Sigmar's been out, they have tried to get me to come back in. A couple of years ago, I decided I liked Beastmen, if you remember that from Warhammer Fantasy. I built that, and then I just went, you know what? I can't be bothered. Then I got badgered a bit more, and it's like, well, okay. I've been kind of pushed towards one-page rules, Age of Fantasy, and I really like that as a skirmish game. And I was looking at doing a barbarian army for that, which would translate nicely into this. I think it was Slaves to Darkness or the names are getting me now. The Khorne army. And I start looking at it and I just go, I'm not interested. I just can't get into this. I looked at Nighthaunts because I really like undead. If I'm going to play a fantasy game, I want to be undead, really. I've done that for a few other games, and I just couldn't be bothered. And again, I keep being badgered by people. I had a couple of games earlier this year. I borrowed a friend's Fire Slayers and went up against his Ogres. And I just find that the mechanics of Age of Sigmar, considering that 40k now uses a variation of the Age of Sigmar Warhammer system, I actually really like the 40k system. I think it works really, really well. I find because it's just different enough with like weird command abilities and it's certain things that you don't have in 40k. I mean, I was really surprised the 40k didn't copy the random roll, see who goes first on each turn when they brought in 8th. I just don't like the AOS system. And it's sort of, I still keep being bugged by people. And then recently I looked at what's it called, Spearhead, this new sort of like mini version of the game to get people into 4th edition. And it was play on tabletop, AOS in 40 minutes. And I love their 40k in 40 minutes video. So I actually sat and watched the 4 or 5 they've got on there. And I went, I like the look of this Spearhead game. If Age of Sigmar is going to be, 4th edition is going to be something similar to this, I might actually be tempted. In my head, the canon, the lore of the world is going to be different because, as I said, I'm not a fan of the mortal realms. But I thought, okay, am I being too harsh on Age of Sigmar? Was it bad when it first started, and over the next 3 editions have they improved it? It certainly looks that way. So I have decided very badly to bite the bullet, and I have ordered myself a copy of the rulebook, my local game store, Games Hub, and the Nighthaunts Spearhead box. In my head, I'm going to do a really simple sort of like paint scheme, which is simply going to be to dry brush and white, spray them white, and then do green wash over them. Not sure I got the dry brush from, to have this like ghostly, spooky feel, and do the cloaks in black and the weapons in actual solid colours like that poltergeistly holding them up, and try and do a really good, nice job of it, and do some sort of like get some 3D printed gravestone markers or something for the bases. And I've got this whole thing in my head, so I'm going to give it a go. And hopefully, I mean, at this point in time, I'm a little bit sick and tired of painting Space Marines. And no other 40k army interests me. So, yep, I'm going to do this. And in a way, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm hoping that actually this will be 4th edition Spearhead will be what gets me into Age of Sigmar. That's my experiences with fantasy. I've got slight variations on that. I mean, I say 1-page rules with their Age of Fantasy, 9th Age, which I'm going to do a video on as well because 9th Age rocked. I just couldn't get people to play it. But you know, so let me know your experiences, your thoughts on Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar, and what you're looking forward to in 4th edition, and what armies you play. And if you've got any suggestions on that concept of how I'm going to paint my ghosts, let me know as well, because that would be really cool and helpful. Anyway, that's just my thoughts and memories and everything else on playing fantasy Warhammer. Thank you for watching. I look forward to any comments down below. In the meantime, if you could give me a thumbs up, it would be really helpful. And hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to grow the channel, and it's only going to get there if I get some viewers. And I need some suggestions. I have got some suggestions from people already for upcoming videos, but the more suggestions, the better, because my brain's sort of running out of some ideas other than constantly going on about armies and so forth. Let me know. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe button. See you in the next vid. Until then, take care, guys. Good gaming.